brand new patch for F1 25 is out now. Version 1.12 is going to be a game-changing patch and also includes the usual sports update, with updates to the 2025 F1 cars, teams, and drivers, featuring a number of visual updates and sponsor changes, and the yearly update DLC to F2 with the current F2 2025 cars, teams, and drivers. But none of that is actually the reason this is going to be a game-changing patch. Those updates always come every year now for the last couple of F1 games, but this is the major thing with version 1.12. To go alongside this patch and the Season 3 of the live service of this game, which is going to refresh itself on Wednesday this week. But today, September 15th, not only are those updates for F2 and the sports update live, but an improvement to computer-controlled AI drivers in all weather conditions. It's an AI update that all of us have been asking for and wanting since the very start of the game, because although in many ways F1 25 has taken us back in the right direction when it comes to wheel-to-wheel racing, general enjoyable gameplay in F1 25, my team, career mode, etc., compared to F1 24, there was still a bit of a niggling issue when it came to the AI being so overpowered out of corners and then in many regards a bit too weak into corners. Let's see it in action from EA themselves, as there was a very small kind of explainer video they put out over the weekend regarding this AI update, and then later in this video I am going to personally put this to the test in a couple of different scenarios and tracks where I felt like they were really quite bad for that OP acceleration and also a bit too easy into the corners. But let's see what EA have to say.
After lots of internal testing and feedback from the F1 25 community, we're dropping an AI driver change on September 15th. Each of the gameplay clips on screen shows the new AI changes in action, with the focus car an example of what you can expect once the latest patch is live. If you take a look at the deltas, which compares against the old AI in identical scenarios, you'll notice that the new AI driver is able to gain time when entering a corner, but loses out on corner exit, particularly noticeable on slower corners. This is closer to how a real-world driver would tackle these corners, carrying a more appropriate amount of speed through the apex of the corner and when accelerating away. You told us that AI is sometimes too fast in the wet. With the changes to acceleration in particular, AI performance is now better aligned to how your car is expected to drive in the same track conditions. As a result, lap times for the AI in the wet are slightly slower, differing on a track and difficulty level basis. We believe these refinements better balance the flow of racing between you and the AI. Whilst lap times in the dry are nearly identical, you might want to adjust your difficulty setting to accommodate, as dive bombing into corners might be trickier now.
So that all does sound very promising and looks good as well when you look at the delta times very closely, especially in the dry example they were giving. You can see that they're losing time on the exits compared to the old trace, but they're gaining time into the corners, which is exactly what we want to see. But you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because I was kind of maybe expecting it to be a little bit more, honestly, because at times it feels like they're gaining tenths of a second out of some of these corners. And this was done, the example video was on Australia, where typically I didn't really think it was that much of an issue, whereas at Miami, Baku, you know, all the tracks where it's a power driven circuit, it really was a glaring issue. But also in this article about the patch notes, they also go on to say, we believe these refinements better balance the flow of racing between you and the AI. Now personally, I thought the flow and wheel-to-wheel battling was really decent already in F1 25, so this could make them even better, because there were so many instances where I felt, oh, I was quite impressed by AI keeping the throttle on. You know, you guys have seen it in my team videos, you know, keeping it in the entire time. So if this is going to encourage that to happen more in the corner, I'm welcoming that, and then vice versa, taking away some of that ridiculous straight line speed, which I felt like in my series has dampened a bit because we've made our car, you know, we're getting to maxed out cars, and also just because of the ERS, you have so much ERS to use in a maxed out car that you can kind of negate that. But I think if you were to restart a career, play a quick race, or even if you get an R&D reset and you lose ERS performance in your My Team car, then you'll really, once again, you would have noticed the craziness of the acceleration. So now hopefully that won't be the case. So if I was to get a reset, season 4 into season 5, hopefully then I won't actually have to deal with any of that annoying acceleration that I was feeling a lot in season 1, season 2, and they kind of felt like it dissipated a bit from season 3 into season 4 because just simply I have so much battery to constantly deploy. But it's a case of realistically you shouldn't have to deploy that much battery to keep up with an AI all the time. And they go on to say you might find it more difficult to dive bomb going into corners because of these changes. That's welcomed because there definitely have been some crazy kamikaze dives that I've been able to pull off, and loads of you have seen as well in your own gameplay. All that AI out of corner acceleration isn't as strong. So hopefully that just means you won't have to make those dive bombs because you're actually able to tangibly keep up with the car and just try and get a move done as you would, setting up a move into the next corner rather than going, I just need to get this done straight away with a big dive because I know I won't get that done. In the dry conditions, lap times for AI drivers are nearly identical to what they were pre-patch, so not too much change there. However, these driver characteristics may encourage you to adjust your difficulty setting. So they're saying if you found maybe, racing at, let's say, 110 AI, if it was a good few before, maybe you might have a little shock to the system because the AI defend more harshly or aren't as slow into the corner, but then vice versa, you should feel them better out of the corner. So to be honest, I think those two things really realistically would balance each other out, but it kind of depends on your driving style, I guess. If you are so dependent on making kamikaze dive bombs to race higher AI levels, maybe then that would cause you to change things, but that's also something I will test out myself as well later on in this video. But before we get to that, we're just now looking through some of the actual other updates with the sports update part of this patch, which was visual updates to the cars, the teams, and drivers. In certain aspects, the biggest kind of standout one for me will be Lewis Hamilton's helmet. You'll now see perplexity on the top of his helmet. And when it comes to the cars, there are some subtle changes for most of the teams with sponsors changing, but there are some pretty major actual chassis shape changes, but the biggest ones you'll notice are with Red Bull and Mercedes. Red Bull now has the larger rounded nose that they were testing with Max Verstappen only at the start of the season. Lawson and then Tsunoda having the older ones and then moving to the new nose eventually. I think it was just Lawson, to be fair. I think by the time Yuki got there, they completely changed it. And then Mercedes as well, which, to be honest, I maybe I've just gotten used to it. I didn't fully realize how big of a change Mercedes nose were and how much prettier the Mercedes was with the old nose. The new one, at least here in the game, the way that it looks in the lighting on the showroom is absolutely gopping, but it's the it's the accurate change. So big updates then for Red Bull, Mercedes with those two nose changes. But really, just like in real life, there haven't been major upgrades. All these teams, IRL, are focusing on 2026, so they're very subtle, performance gains. There was recently just some articles talking about that. They're making these cheap upgrades to brake ducts rather than actual floor changes or nose changes or front wings. So there aren't many major model changes apart from Red Bull Merc because they made those early season upgrades. But of course, it took till now to see those in the F1 game, whereas if it kind of followed on a bit quicker, there really wouldn't be that much actual body changes. It's more just, as the patch notes say, sponsors, maybe some logo placements here and there. I've noticed, on the Halo, a few changes, like with the McLaren, for example. And then, like I said, biggest kind of driver changes you'll see, like, Hamilton's helmet being different. And I'm sure other drivers have also gone through some sponsor updates, basically, and maybe some changes to the overalls, essentially. And then, obviously, it's the big DLC, if you will, of the sports update, is F2. So F2 last year was very big and exciting because it was the first time we got the new F2 car, which kind of looked a little bit more like the F1, kind of like an F1 baby car, but now it's the same chassis. Formula 2 typically keeps the same chassis and shape for a couple of years, so it's the same shape, but you get obviously all the new drivers, all the different liveries, with each team basically having the kind of split livery, as it were. And, this season we've seen quite a few drivers, who are affiliated with F1 programs, be in Formula 2. You've got Luke Browning with the Williams. Big one is Alexander Dunn with the McLaren F2 car. It's the first time in a couple of years, I think, isn't it, that an F2 car looks like a McLaren F1 car. Obviously, Red Bull, no strangers to having a lot of F2 cars looking like a Red Bull racing car. And we've had Williams, liveried F2 cars and F3 cars for a few years, but it's been a little bit of time since we've had a out-and-out McLaren copycat livery like the one we're seeing with Alexander Dunn. And then we've got obviously brand new driver scans for the F2 drivers, the most accurate scans that we've had so far. Obviously, we spoke about this earlier on in the year, EA with F1 very much using the same technology that EA use for FC now, with the 360 kind of, scoped around camera. And, we saw, our Arvid Lindblad there briefly. Obviously, I got baited into thinking that Lindblad might be one of the F3 driver icons because it made sense. He was touted as maybe one of the next big stars for Red Bull in the Red Bull pipeline. But alas, it was the 4 drivers we got in F3. And to be fair, I'm thankful we did, because obviously that ended up being a really cool thing and story for us of having Tim Tramnitz in there. But yeah, so those scans that we were talking about that we saw Lindblad have in Australia were actually then just clearly just for the F2 update. They must have done those scans for this F2 update in Australia, which kind of just shows you the timeline of how long this update takes to get into the game. We're, here in September, but they did those 3D scans in March at the start of the season. So yeah, a bit of a long lag time. I feel like at some point they maybe should or want to try and bring the F2 update closer, but I suppose at the same time it always does bring a bit of interest. It's nice to have actual new tangible content added to the game in January, added to the game in September. It's just F2 though, so at the end of the day the novelty maybe wears off a little bit. But we're now going through into F1 World, into Grand Prix mode, because we're going to go ahead and test out for ourselves this AI update. So we're starting off our testing at Baku, not only because it's the upcoming IRL GP, but it's one of the circuits I feel where that acceleration, that OP acceleration, was pretty bad, especially down the main straight, and it's just generally really difficult to save battery because you're having to use it so much to keep up with the AI. Into turn 1, feeling, the AI were fairly aggressive there. We were 3 wide into the first corner. Early days, but already maybe feeling they were maybe a bit punchier going into the brake zone. Here, having to use battery to stay ahead of Leclerc, but he wasn't alongside as much as I thought he would be pre-patch, basically. But now this is going to be the real test. Out of this left-hander, usually, they were just running away from you. But now, just a bit of battery use, and we are now keeping up. I can actually turn off overtake mode and still keep up with Antonelli's AI here. Whereas before, you would have to keep deploying all the way down the section you were in order to keep up with them. Whereas now, it's more realistic. It's more like previous F1 games where you could stop deploying in a reasonable place on the straight or sector, and you could expect to keep up, or at least maintain a little bit of that speed you've got. And in a situation like this where we've stopped deploying, we're on medium here, and we're gaining subtly on Antonelli with slipstream. That would have never have happened pre-patch, I don't think. You can comment below and disagree if you want, but I think that's the best example really here in Baku of the patch working in that regard with the acceleration. Here as well, only deployed for a little bit. Antonelli keeps up with us, but not really making huge gains, whereas pre-patch, it was basically a death sentence to be on medium for most of the straights. You had to either be deploying and then going none every corner to then get the energy back, whereas now I feel like it's letting you play the game a lot more how it used to be, like on F1 23, where you could relax a bit with the constant ERS changes, and you could basically run most of the race in medium, going down to none if you wanted to save extra for a real big push of energy. If you really were struggling to get past someone, let's say you're in a slower car, but you overuse battery to get it and then get past them, that's fine. That's, that's what you have to do sometimes. But having to constantly change ERS every single waking second, every corner, I, for one, don't think is realistic. It's not also fun to play with. It might be like a meta that esports drivers have to do constantly in league racing, but I think for career mode players, casual players, single player players, you just don't need a mechanic like that where you're having to change it every single 5 seconds. You know, just being able to go to medium and be fine and use a bit of overtake mode is calm. You can see here we're saving a bit of battery with none, but then we've gone a bit of overtake, but then I've stuck a medium. DRS is enough. We're able to get down the inside of Sonoda. Sonoda keeps his foot in here, so this is maybe now more of that, you know, into the corner, carrying more speed. Sonoda does really well to come back at me through that right-hander, so I think that was also a good example of the AI carrying more speed into some of the apexes or being better under braking, basically. And then I think here, this clip in lap 5, this was me testing out, you know, how extreme is the catch-up if I just go on none. So I'm on none, ERS, and Sonoda starts to gain on me. I then use overtake mode. I feel pre-patch he would have minced me at that point. If I started off none and then went overtake as he started to gain on me, he would have been flying by me. But instead, I was able to actually stay ahead fully while saving some battery out the corner and then appropriately using the battery to defend. So I think Baku was a good tester. Miami, though, was a real litmus test because I think Miami was one of the worst culprits for this crazy AI, you know, straight line speed acceleration thing. Maybe also one of the first tracks people really felt at that, because up to this point in career mode, I don't think the tracks previously were that bad for that, but Miami was probably the biggest flare up. So maybe also it's just a bit of, you know, bias of it came up first, so that's why people think Miami's one of the worst. But I for one do think it is literally one of the worst, because in this section and the back straight and into turn 1 as well, off the last corner, just so difficult to keep people behind. Now, bear in mind, I've got medium here. Yeah, sure, Leclerc's got past me here, but he's not flown by me, and I for one think Verstappen would have got me pre-patch if I'd stayed on medium like that the entire time. Bear in mind, though, it's the opening lap, so maybe the bit of difference of battery usage as well for the AI, but I kind of also wanted to be behind Leclerc, same car, to test this out. Out the corner, now Leclerc does get away a little bit there, so for me, initially, I was thinking, okay, it's an improvement at a place like Baku, but I think here in Miami, it's still a little bit of an issue you're going to face here, where it's the same exact car, and he has pulled away with me. I did deploy a fair amount of battery. I did stop about halfway through, but still, it did still seem quite crazy. But also at the same time, you can argue Leclerc's AI was over-deploying to try and catch Antonelli, which he has done now. He's overtaken. So here now on Antonelli, bit of a slower car maybe. We've used battery. We've stopped deploying at this point, but I'm still keeping up with him, whereas before I wouldn't have been able to. So in this regard, you can see also here in Miami, it has improved. I've been able to actually make a move. There was no way I think we would have made a move on Antonelli into that corner pre-patch if I'd stopped deploying where I stopped deploying. DRS alone would not have been powerful enough pre-patch, and now it is. So in other regards, it is improved, but there's still, I think, a little bit of that acceleration coming through at a place like Miami, and maybe other places will be like that. You know, maybe Monza, I don't know, Spa. I'm trying to think of other circuits where it's been bad at Qatar, the final corner. Maybe it's going to be noticeable. There are instances where you're still getting minced a little bit, but then in other regards, it's pretty all right. Like here, I've stopped deploying. Antonelli has DRS on me. I don't have DRS now, and he's nowhere near me. I'm actually really calm there. So that was quite surprising. I thought he was going to completely get me there. I then let him by and Verstappen by, because I then wanted to see it on a different car. You know, Verstappen here, he's got DRS. I've deployed a bit. Now we're both going to have DRS open. We're keeping up, and we're actually going for a little move. Not going to commit to it because it's a bit tight into the left-hander, so we probably could have gone for the dive down the inside. But Verstappen on Antonelli has had the onus to dive down the inside, so that, I think, is an example of the AI being better on each other for going down the inside, making that move. But at the same time, one could argue the AI were already good at doing that. They're already pretty aggressive with each other, making moves. But yeah, Miami was a bit more of a iffy grey area, I thought. Baku certainly looked better. Miami wasn't fully convincing, but there were still glimpses clearly of that being better, which is at least, you know, what you want to go in the direction of. And now we're testing out full wet conditions. Excuse the graphics and the lack of spray and rain on the camera. I think where I've set my my camera point isn't really getting all the rain rendering in properly. But to be honest, that's not what we care about. We care about, are the AI a bit slower and wet so you can actually keep up with them and race them? Because Canada was certainly the place where I got my pants pulled down in terms of the AI being overpowered. I was losing a second a lap to the AI. Now, this is the same sort of race conditions that I had, I think, in career mode at the time. And here, lap 2, we've pulled away from Verstappen. Over a second we are to him, and we're keeping up with Lewis. We're having to use battery to keep up with him, but we are actually able to gain on him by using that. Whereas before pre-patch, if you look back at my career mode, I think it was in the wet in Canada Season 1, no matter how much battery you used, you weren't keeping up with the AI. You weren't going to catch them. Whereas now, if I saved up enough tactically, I could use overtake mode and get Lewis at some point. We were getting close here, just wasn't getting close enough, but at the same time, the added caveat is I've never been the strongest wet weather driver ever, so if I was a little bit better, maybe I could have got Hamilton at some point here, but we're keeping up with him. We're gaining, and we're losing Verstappen by 1.3, 1.4 seconds. Unheard of pre-patch. Pre-patch, I would have been like P7, P8. I would have lost like 10 seconds to these guys in 5 laps. So this was a night and day difference in wet conditions, in full wets this is. I don't know what it's like in inters. I hope it's going to be about the same. So overall, this patch to the AI, I think is in a massive positive step forward. It's not perfect. I think there are still inklings of that acceleration a little bit here and there, but there needs to be a certain line, because at some point you just say, oh, that's just battery management. Like, you know, I need to do a better job managing battery to have battery to use. So it's hard to know where the line is of they fully fixed it, but you can clearly see it is so much better at Baku, and in instances at Miami, in scenarios where I have enough battery to use, it's a different car performance, etc, etc. So I think it's a really, really solid patch, where especially when you're restarting a career or you don't have a maxed out car in my team, you're going to notice it's a better experience with the AI. But let me know in the comments below what you guys are making of it after you've tried it out for yourselves in a career scenario, maybe in a Grand Prix scenario. Either way, let me know. And then when it comes to the sports update, as I've said, it's the usual sports update. It's a welcome addition, you know, with changes to Red Bull and Mercedes, for example, big changes which make a tangible visual difference to the game. Obviously, F2 is a nice novelty to have. I've not tested out F2 2025 for this video this year, because in theory, it should be the exact same as last year in terms of the F2 car, the chassis, the engine, etc. Everything has not changed since last year. And so, like previous years before F1 24, you know, the F2, the addition was nice for the new drivers, the new liveries, but really the playing experience should be the exact same, maybe a little bit different because the handling models change, but you know, in theory, it really should be the same. So unless it feels a bit different, so let me know in the comments below if you want me to test that out in a future video, because when Season 3 refreshes on Wednesday, I think I'll be bringing you guys a video just to go through any of the new kind of bits with Season 3, if there's any more new content to play with an F1 world maybe. But for this video, testing it out with the AI specifically was the major part of this, testing that out, and I can conclude it's a good positive step in the right direction, which is just what you want to see. So guys, if you have enjoyed it, hit the like button, let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you're around here, then do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.